Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And we are going to carry on our discussion, drugs and toxicology. We finished off, we were actually talking about stimulants, and we were talking specifically last time about cocaine. So cocaine still funds a huge industry in the United States. It still funds a huge drug trafficking industry. And is the source of a tremendous amount of associated crime and illegality. So if we look at the numbers of people who use cocaine in the United States, that is still a substantial number, although the use of all forms of cocaine has in fact fallen for reasons that I'll show you in a minute. But close to 1 million people a year, if asked to fill in questionnaires, etc., would qualify for being diagnosed with cocaine use disorder. Now, that terminology, cocaine use disorder, is because this does not qualify as a physical addiction, because the physical addictive quality of cocaine is very low. But it has a tremendously powerful psychological addictive component for many people. It is used occasionally with minimal problems by many people, but there is a substantial proportion of those who will begin cocaine use who will end up being psychologically addicted and will end up building cocaine into their lifestyle so that it becomes the dominant feature of their lifestyle. That would almost be a definition of cocaine use disorder. Look at the age of those, and you find most of them are people 26 and older. 26 to mid-30s is usually where people will establish the pattern of cocaine use disorder. As we said before, you need most people who use refined cocaine will have some kind of disposable income, will be networking, socializing, etc., in circles where it's likely to be used. And for those of them who go on to have to endure a use disorder syndrome, that is where it will become established. But it may, if they have the disposable income and everything else, it may persist, of course, much longer than mid-30s. It becomes extremely disabling for people who are severely disordered by cocaine usage. So that is refined cocaine. There is one thing to realize about refined cocaine. I think we've got a picture here. Here's this snow. It used to be called. And it is this fine white powder. And that now it can be injected, prepared and injected, but by far its major usage is it's sniffed. The thing to realize about it is that actually our uptake mechanisms, when you sniff it like this, our uptake mechanisms are relatively inefficient. And so I just need to check something here. I'm sorry. Yes, okay. I'm sorry. Oh God, what have I done now? Honestly, what have I done? Sorry, people. I'm sorry. I unshared the screen. That's what I did. So I hope you can all see still. Excuse me dithering around. Right, okay. So the thing about refined cocaine, our uptake mechanisms are relatively inefficient. So a lot of the stimulant, in actual fact, if you want to think of it this way, is going to waste. But you can actually process cocaine and a pile of cocaine like this is going to cost you a lot of money, and most of the stimulant is going to waste. But you can process that, and you can concentrate the stimulant in a way, and you can also change the stimulant so that it makes it much more easily available to our receptors and everything. You get a much bigger kick. And this is how the whole rationale behind making crack cocaine. Crack cocaine is made from the same base that refined cocaine is made. And it can be processed relatively simply in a home lab, etc. And it produces lumps which are small, but which have tremendous, tremendous potency. So what happened was that people manufacturing crack cocaine were producing a cheap product with tremendous potency, which now could be made available to people with very little money. Where this refined cocaine was in the province of the elites, crack cocaine was the poor man's cocaine, and a little bit could go a very, very long way. It could also be used by different methods. It could be smoked in a pipe, which is relatively efficient. It's smoked in a crack pipe, which is a relatively efficient way of using it. So a small amount goes a very long way, but it can also be injected. It can be processed and injected as well. It's extremely potent, weight for weight, far more potent than refined cocaine. You only need a small amount to get a very big effect. It's not going to cost you nearly as much as refined cocaine. The advent of crack cocaine was an utter and absolute disaster for communities throughout the United States. It struck especially hard at African American communities, at poor communities, rural communities as well, where people felt under economic stress and under stress generally, felt disempowered, and suddenly there was this drug that made you feel, however transitory and illusional it was, made you feel powerful and energized and everything. But it had its potency is so great, it has huge physical effects as well. It was a very debilitating thing to use on a constant basis. And crack cocaine would people very quickly developed dependencies. It became associated with a huge trafficking trade. And of course, to fund it, the cocaine still had to be brought up from South America, and it was processed largely here in the United States. So there were an enormous number of illegal labs, etc. A huge sociology came to be erected around crack cocaine, and the communities which used it became absolutely crime ravaged purely because of the crack cocaine traffic and people's need to establish ways of getting it, establishing an income which could buy them the cocaine that they needed. Although it has the same characteristic as refined cocaine, that formally it does not have a strong physical addictive quality. Nonetheless, its dependency on crack cocaine is so powerful, so incredibly powerful, that it really should be regarded as a true addiction. Though formally, you will read that it's not a physical addiction, but the psychologically addictive properties of crack cocaine are immense. And one of the reasons for that is that coming down from a crack cocaine high could plunge people into a tremendous depression, which necessitated the need for another hit. Also, people just felt good, even though they were starving in rat-infested houses or wherever. it could still make you feel good. It could make you feel good no matter what. And that is the tremendous power of drugs in general. Very, very few people who developed dependency were able to successfully kick the habit without tremendous amount of assistance. And unfortunately, a huge number of people died as a result of the crack epidemic. They died just from general debility. They died from associated diseases. Those who injected were very subject to diseases like hepatitis C and HIV. And it also drove this immense prison population. It drove this immense epidemic of incarceration, which we're still suffering the effects of. In an attempt to control it, legislation of absolutely draconian strength was passed by Congress and resulted in enormous prison sentences for minor possession and things like that. And this fed out not only crack cocaine itself, which was a huge problem, particularly in the 1980s, but with associated drugs. For example, even marijuana, that came to enjoy really very, very punitive sentences and things, simply because there was this association in, well, any drug is bad, because every drug is like crack cocaine. It's not true. Crack cocaine is extremely bad, but the legislation went totally overboard, as far as I'm concerned, is my opinion. And we are still suffering the effects of that. So this is what crack cocaine looks like. These little small kind of this is pure white. Looks like icing sugar, confectioner's sugar. Crack cocaine is an off-white lump like that. And as I say, a small amount gives a tremendous high. So not much needs to be used. It was cheap. A lot of crack cocaine could be produced from refined cocaine or from raw cocaine, the raw cocaine base, because what is happening is they're concentrating the active components and making it much more easily available to be taken up and perceived by the receptors. Okay, so we have in the United States very, very stringent drug control laws. We can express opinion about either the need for them or their efficacy, but there they are. Our drug laws are very punitive compared to comparable nations, like European nations. Do not have the same stringency, but our drug laws are rather more liberal than many developing countries and third world countries, kind of sit in the middle. But it has to be said that in the United States, we appear to have opted more towards punitive measures against illegal drug use, rather than curative. Their drug treatment programs remain relatively rare, and quite honestly, if you look at the statistics, are relatively ineffective. But the punitive aspect, incarceration, remains extremely strong and extremely common. Throughout the United States, there are mandatory sentences, which, for instance, magistrates or judges are required to impose for drug possession or drug dealing. They don't have much discretion to send people to treatment facilities rather than shuttling them into jails and prisons. So the overarching law, the US federal law, is the Controlled Substances Act. And it establishes 5 categories of drug. In doing so, they were supposed to have examined the potential for abuse, the potential for physical and psychological dependence, and the medical value. Whether a drug had, if a drug had any medicinal value, then it had to be made available to medical usage. It couldn't be forbidden. Its use could not be forbidden entirely. So these are 3 factors that fed into it. But as I'll show you, Schedule 1 drugs. Now, these are the most stringently regulated of the drugs. They are judged to have a very, very high potential for abuse and no acceptable medical use. Well, this is, not, when we look at the list, you will see exactly why I'm kind of shaking my head. Because look at the list. Well, heroin, of course it does, has a huge potential for abuse. It's very easily used. It can be smoked, it can be injected. There is a roaring trade in illegal opiates, which fund it, but it definitely has medical use as well. So, and it is widely used medically, especially in intractable pain and that sort of thing. The next on the list, marijuana. Whoa. How did marijuana end up being a Schedule 1 drug? It's anybody's guess, because it does not carry a high potential for abuse at all. It has a very low potential for physical and even psychological addiction. Some people do have problems with it, but it is a fairly low use. The reason it ended up here is because people firmly believed that it was a gateway drug. That in fact, people who use marijuana, especially people who use it on a regular basis, were at risk of moving to other drugs and ending up being on heroin or something like that. And that if you could close the gateway by putting marijuana there, then you would stop. This is completely specious argument, in my opinion. And marijuana absolutely does not belong, in my opinion. Again, I emphasize my opinion. It does not belong here. There are other drugs which do, but here are another 2, psilocybin and LSD. Psilocybin and LSD are hallucinogens, neither of them with a high potential for abuse. Neither of them carry a strong any physical addictive property. They may have some psychological dependency associated with them, but in general, their use, when you look at people's usage of them, it is occasional. And they are there because people at the time, when this schedule was drawn up in the 60s and the 70s, people were scared of these drugs. They believed that they would lead people to drug abuse of all sorts of other things. Schedule 2 drugs have a very high potential for abuse, but they do also have frequent medical application as well. And these are drugs such as cocaine, a PCP, and then all of the amphetamines, barbiturates, all of these sorts of things, which in fact were developed for medicinal purposes. So they continue to have medicinal usage, but when they leave the medical practice and they go onto the street, then they do have tremendous potential for abuse. If you want to think about cocaine, where have we all, not to say all, where have we, most of us, encountered a cocaine product? At the dentist's office. The Novocaine you get injected into your gums before you have work done on your teeth, that is a cocaine derivative. It's just that it doesn't have a global effect, a global systemic effect. it only has a very localized effect on the nerves where it is injected. But that is an example of a cocaine product which is in wide medical usage. Schedule 3 drugs have a lower potential for abuse, and they also have a medical usage. That these are some of the barbiturates. Some barbiturates belong here in Schedule 2, but some belong are Schedule 3 drugs. They have a much lower potential for abuse. And then there are other drugs such as codeine. Codeine is an opiate, but it's an opiate with very low potential for physical addiction, and it has a really restricted medical usage. It's not a very powerful drug. The one thing it's currently it's widely used for because of COVID-19. It has it is an antitussive. That means it stops you from coughing. So it has that. It's very frequently used in cough medicines. That used to be one of the abuse mechanisms. People used to abuse cough syrup to get codeine. Schedule 4 means have low potential for abuse. Continue the theme. They have widespread medical usage, and typical of these would be the tranquilizers such as Valium and Librium, Xanax. These kinds of drugs would be Schedule 4. Schedule 5, they very low abuse potential, and they things which have non-narcotic medicinal ingredients. But also included in Schedule 5 are many things which could be used, for example, cough syrups, cold remedies, these sorts of things which can be appropriated and manipulated to produce some other powerful kind of drug like methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, crystal meth, is produced from a relatively innocuous cold remedies that contain ephedrine. And that would be a Schedule 5, a typical Schedule 5. It's in other words, all of these, their sale is regulated. And Schedule 5, you might be able to get off prescription, some Schedule 5s, but all of the rest, all of these, if they have a medicinal use, it would be by prescription only. Okay, so let's just start to think about how scientists in the forensic field need to address questions about drug use and drug abuse and drug involvement in crime. Well, as with many other things, there is a special arm of forensics called forensic toxicology, and the forensic toxicologist is responsible for detecting and identifying the presence of drugs. Very, very importantly, they're often called on to determine the concentration of drugs, and may also be called on to assess the impact of those concentrations on a person's functioning. For example, somebody is found dead, and they have drug paraphernalia, as ejection syringe, but nobody knows what did they inject. Did they inject heroin? Did they inject morphine? Did they inject fentanyl? And was that in sufficient quantity to have caused the death? A toxicologist will obtain samples, usually of body fluids, take it, try to identify what substance it is that is present, what its concentration is, and is that at a high enough concentration to have resulted in the death? Because it's not sure. If you find a body lying there with drug paraphernalia, it's not sure that they overdosed. They could have been smothered. They could have been using drugs and had something else happen to cause the death. It's not an assumption that one immediately makes, but a forensic toxicologist can examine body fluids, determine what the drug is, and say they have this concentration of the drug in the blood, and that is more than enough to have resulted in death. This becomes critically important. For example, if somebody is found unconscious or whatever, and drug usage is suspected, and they rush to an emergency room, well, how exactly do the emergency personnel treat a person if they don't know what the person took, what is present in their blood? Because it could be any one of a huge number of different drugs, each of which might need a different kind of treatment. So forensic toxicologists are often called on to work in emergency mode to try to identify substances so that people can be adequately treated. Okay, so let's talk first. When we think about forensic toxicology, of course, our minds immediately go to heroin and cocaine and all sorts of things. In actual fact, the bulk of drug involvement in the United States is with the commonest drug, and that is the legal drug of alcohol. And alcohol outshines all other drugs in its association with crime and also with death, accepting that alcohol abuse may result in death from many different causes, which might not immediately be attributed to the actual presence of alcohol in the blood. So alcohol is the most commonly used and most commonly abused drug in Western society throughout the United States and Europe and all the rest of it. And an entire branch of forensic toxicology becomes devoted to looking at the alcohol and its involvement in forensic science. And it is so frequently involved in criminal violation that it's almost a given that very frequently people involved at a crime scene will be tested for alcohol. Whether or not they appear to be drunk, they may well be tested for the presence of alcohol. And the forensic toxicologist presented, for example, with the body of somebody who has died in a car accident, may be called on to examine that body to determine, is alcohol present? And at what concentration is the alcohol present? Because we have fairly good information about blood alcohol concentration and its influence on human behavior. We know pretty much at such and such a blood alcohol concentration, these aspects of neurological function become impaired. And this may well be a contributing factor that the forensic toxicologist could advise on. Alcohol, the chemical name is ethanol or ethyl alcohol. And it's normally diluted. It's actually very toxic. So we drink it in a dilute form. And we drink it sufficiently dilute that our bodies can process it before its toxic nature overwhelms us. It sometimes goes wrong. And people actually binging on alcohol can very easily die of the direct effects of the ethanol itself. It is a toxin. But far more deaths occur because of the effects of alcohol on the physiology of a human being. So about 17,000 traffic deaths in this country a year are attributed to alcohol intoxication. But a huge number of crimes, and especially crimes of violence, are also associated with alcohol use and abuse. Alcohol is a depressant, surprisingly enough. You might think the opposite. The reason that we feel lively and everything else when we take alcohol in certain quantities is that it depresses inhibitions. It depresses conscience, and it depresses your sense of social responsibility. So people under the influence of alcohol tend to become very impulsive, even if their impulses impact badly on other people around them. That sense of empathy and everything that we should normally feel for other people is vastly decreased. People, in fact, with alcohol use, people in fact become more and more selfish in a way. And this explains how it is that somebody under a normally non-violent, ordinary person under the influence of alcohol can suddenly become violent and begin to behave extremely badly towards the people around them. And that can have dire consequences. So all of these effects can be tied to the concentration of alcohol in the brain itself. We don't have to take a brain sample to determine how much alcohol is percolating in the brain. We can look at the concentration of alcohol in the blood. Now, that is not true for many substances, I should tell you. Many substances will not pass from the blood into the brain tissue and affect the brain and its functioning. But alcohol very easily passes out of our bloodstream and into the tissues of the brain and affects our neurological functioning. But we can get a good idea about what's happening in the brain by measuring the concentration of alcohol in the blood. So you will often see a reference to an alcohol unit. And an alcohol unit, in actual fact, has a physiological basis. It's when we drink alcohol, it's very quickly absorbed by the stomach, enters the bloodstream, and then it is metabolized. It's viewed as a toxin by the body and is processed largely by the liver and also by the kidneys. And the liver has a whole set of enzymes which break alcohol down. And then those byproducts are excreted by the kidneys. So if you take an alcoholic drink, just one alcoholic drink, then it will take time to be absorbed, time to be circulated, time to pass through the liver and be processed by the liver, and time to be excreted by the kidneys. 1 unit is the amount that a healthy adult processes in about an hour. So it's very interesting when we say 1 alcoholic unit. Now let's have a look. That's about 10 milliliters, 8 grams of pure alcohol. It's a small amount. That's about a tablespoon or so, a large tablespoon of pure alcohol. So let's have a look at our common drinks and what. So here's a glass of beer, and this is about 2.3 units. How long will it take you? It'll take you, you just have one. It'll take you more than 2 hours to process this completely and allow it to be voided. Here, there's not that much difference. This is just a stronger beer. Beer varies tremendously in the amount of alcohol that it contains. And if you are interested, you can look on the side of a can and you can see exactly how much alcohol it contains. This is a strong beer. That is 3 units. Many of the commonly drunk beers in the United States are relatively low in alcohol for a beer, 1.9 units. That would be probably Michelob or something like that. But look at the volumes that these are. They're high volume. So people would tend to take longer to drink them. And people very quickly learn to regulate the amount that they are drinking to achieve a certain effect. So socially, people often drink for that lifting of inhibitions. The shyness disappears, the conversation is a little bit quicker, or the wit is a little bit quicker, etc., 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 or because your inhibitions are being lifted, but you don't want necessarily to be incapacitated. People will regulate the amount that they drink. And how many people tend to drink, this is not a rule, but they tend in social settings to drink about 3 units an hour. Well, 3 units is going to take 3 hours to clear. Okay, so that's 2 beers, maybe a beer and a half in an hour. That may not sound very much to you. If you think about going out with your friends, people often are drinking far more than that, and they drink faster and faster. Why? Because their inhibitions are lower. The alcohol itself begins to sap your ability to determine what the impact is being. So people tend, once they start drinking very often, it becomes reinforcing. They drink more and more and more. It's very easy to quickly surpass our ability to process the alcohol. You process 1 unit in about an hour, and you're drinking 3 or 4 units an hour. You're accumulating an alcohol debt, which is actually going to take several hours before you process it all. And here's something really important. Even that 1 unit, even though it sounds like only a very little, that 1 unit has very powerful effects, discernible effects. If your reflexes were to be measured, 1 unit would still be able, we would still be able to discern that 1 unit had discernible effects on your reflex time, for example, on your response time, even on your perception at time, your depth perception, all sorts of things become altered. Once you start drinking, you need to allow a lot of time for that alcohol to be completely processed. So those are high volume drinks like beers and everything else. Go to lower volume drinks and have a look here, and here's a glass of red white wine, a normal, and this is a normal wine, 2 units, 3 units, but might also get up as high as 3 or 3.3 units. So these are high alcohol, low volume. You're getting a lot of alcohol in a small volume. Surprisingly enough, if we go to the spirits like whiskey, gin, these sort of things, a single drink often only comprises 1 unit, about 1 unit, very low volume, a tot. And what is happening, it's very high alcohol content, so the volume is reduced. In a way, we try to regulate, we try to modulate. If it's lower alcohol content, we up the volume. If it's higher, we tend to drink a smaller volume. Whatever you do, remember that 1 unit takes about an hour to be processed. So once people begin drinking, then the blood is very quickly absorbed. It can be absorbed directly across the stomach wall and also in the small intestine if the drink passes through your gut. And within minutes, people begin to feel an effect of having had a drink. So let's just have a look at this, at our listing. 1 drink, the blood alcohol concentration gets to, we'll see the units in a minute, 0.01 to 0.05. And the legal limit is, in the United States, is 0.08. So even 1 drink, you're already increasing, you're getting pretty close to the legal limit. And if you were to have 2 drinks in an hour, you would be accumulating. If you just had this 1 drink and you waited an hour, your blood alcohol level would probably come very low as you processed all of that. Even at that low level, we have discernible effects: loss of inhibition, feeling of well-being, relaxation. That's what most people are heading towards. 2 to 3 drinks, let's say 2 to 3 drinks in the hour, your blood alcohol level is going to increase, and it's going to go over the legal limit. You're going to go up to about 0.1. And now those feelings may continue. The pleasure, the inhibitions become much more powerfully suppressed. But as you get up here, you start to feel some of the really toxic effects of alcohol. You may begin to feel nauseous. You may begin to feel extremely sleepy, but most dangerously, the control over emotions gets to be lost. This is one of the things which is inhibited, our emotional control. This is when people collapse on the bar, sobbing about a girlfriend who dumped them 20 years ago. This is also when the guy suddenly becomes enraged because he thinks you're looking at him, or you thinks you're looking at his girlfriend. The lady becomes enraged because she's convinced that somebody is going to steal her boyfriend. People become absolutely enraged about things that would not even occur to them in their normal state. Why? Because all of their emotional processing has become distorted as our ability to process properly becomes inhibited. This is a very, very dangerous place. A lot of violence happens here in this 2 to 3 drinks an hour range as the blood alcohol level gets to here. Gets even worse as people become frankly inebriated well over the legal limit. They begin to suffer from profound mood swings. The guy who's laughing and joking 1 minute with you 1 minute before is suddenly enraged at you because he thinks you made a joke about his mother. All of those things which we saw here now become profound, and you're now in a very, very dangerous place indeed. People there need to be very carefully treated, and they need to be removed from the source of the problem, which is alcohol. But at the same time, they need to be removed from any likelihood, for example, that they might get in a car. Even here, there is severely impaired coordination. There's very poor, one of the things we'll see in a minute, one of the things that we lose is our ability to use our eyeballs properly, to track motion. Our depth perception gets thrown off completely. It's at this stage here that you start, for example, to see double. The reason for that is the control of the eyeball. Normally, we control our eyeballs so that our brain forms a single image. At this stage here, eyeballs begin to lose the ability to track together. They begin to diverge, squint, and you develop 2 images that your brain can't put together. You can't resolve. This is very, very dangerous area here. And this is really, from here on, this is where people actually become frankly dangerous. Dangerous in terms of violence, dangerous in terms of driving cars, doing really stupid things that can end very badly. This here, 6 to 9 drinks, well, and a blood alcohol level of 0.3. A lot depends now on the status of the drinker. If this is somebody who is frankly alcoholic and is used to a very high level of alcohol, they may appear to be functional here. Somebody who is not used to drinking, who is seldom exposed to alcohol at this stage, would probably be unconscious unable to function at all. But now things like aggression, that sort of thing, become very much enhanced. But the ability to drive a car, do anything like this, even though the person may think, they may believe that they are able to, they are completely and utterly unable to. More than that, the toxic effects of alcohol begin to overwhelm even an alcoholic, somebody who is used to a very high blood alcohol concentration. And the reason for that is that the physiology of the organism becomes overwhelmed. The ability to control temperature, the ability of many of the organs to function, the ability to control blood pressure, all of these sorts of things begin to collapse. And at this stage, very often people are actually unconscious. And if you observe somebody in that state who's unconscious because of alcohol consumption, this is not a joke. This is not a time to put funny costumes on the person or paint their face or whatever. This is a time to put them in a car, make sure that they're in a position where they can breathe properly and get them to a hospital. Because people die at this level. People do die. And it really is an emergency situation when somebody becomes unconscious because of alcohol use. Okay, so here's how it's processed. First of all, we need to absorb the alcohol. Second of all, once we absorb the alcohol, it is distributed through the body by the circulatory system. Its most important effect is on the brain and on the functioning of the brain. And it's for its behavioral aspects that we principally drink, for those feelings that it produces, but it also acts on the muscles. It causes muscles to relax, etc. Our body immediately begins to process it, and given enough time, we will actually process all of it and eliminate it. But it's while it is in circulation in the body that it has its effects. So if you have a drink on an empty, or let's say you ate sometime before, but it's a little while since you ate, or your stomach is empty, alcohol from one drink is completely absorbed within 30 to 90 minutes. That's really fast. Okay, you've got most of it by the time it's half an hour has gone by. But if your stomach is full, you vastly delay that absorption time. And it will take, when you drink on a full stomach, it takes 2 to 4 hours before you absorb one drink. So that that sounds like a good thing, right? If I'm going to be out with friends, etc., let me have a good meal beforehand. Yes, that is a good idea. But there is a problem with this, and that is most people are drinking to effect, whether they like to admit it or not. So you have a big meal, and then you meet up with friends afterwards. Why do you have a drink? Well, one of the reasons that you're having a drink is to feel that suppression of inhibition and everything else, to feel relaxed with your friends, to have a laugh and joke and etc., etc. All of that because the alcohol is inhibitory of the emotions of shyness and everything else. The problem is that somebody who's just had a big meal, they have a drink and they don't feel anything. They don't feel any effect. Why? Because they're not absorbing it very quickly. So the temptation then is to very quickly have another drink. And even that one, that's not going to, but now people have a third drink. They drink very quickly. In fact, they start off their evening by binging, but all of that alcohol is still there. And it's still going to be absorbed. And people can get themselves into very bad trouble very, very quickly in this circumstance, because they initially have very little effect from the alcohol, and then they put a large quantity of alcohol into the stomach, and then all of a sudden, all of this alcohol enters the bloodstream, and they are suddenly hammered because of it. This is a very dangerous tactic. If you do drink on a full stomach, be aware of the fact that you should still regulate your drinking as if you had not eaten. Okay, and you should try for 1 drink an hour, because that is what your body can process. So we definitely self-medicate. We tend to take in an alcohol dose, which produces a desired psychological and physical effect. The problem now that under normal circumstances, social drinking, occasional social drinking, that is not necessarily a problem. But people who drink regularly drink to effect, and they become tolerant of higher alcohol dosage. And so they tend to drink more and more to achieve the same levels. So this is an extremely dangerous this pattern, because it's a self-reinforcing and leads us to drink more and more regularly. We've already pointed out, I already pointed out that it does, the absorption does depend somewhat on the drink that you're using. A high volume drink like a beer, it's actually absorbed, the alcohol is absorbed more slowly because it's in a much bigger volume. A small unit, although something like a spirit might only have 1 unit in it, that unit is absorbed extremely quickly in your stomach. As anybody who does shots will know, a shot hits very, very quickly, because you've got a very, very high concentration of alcohol in that small volume. The slower the absorption rate, the longer it's going to take for the blood alcohol level to reach a peak, to reach maximum concentration. So in many ways, drinking high volume drinks like this is often a safer procedure, because you will take longer to drink that volume, and the volume itself bulks the drink out so that you absorb more slowly. So here is blood alcohol concentrations measured with full and with empty stomach. Again, it begins to appear that having full stomach is actually a fairly good strategy. Just be very careful, because you're not going to feel the effects of alcohol very quickly. Here's this is the blood alcohol level, and this is after the same units of alcohol. 5 ounces of 80% proof vodka, that's 40% alcohol. They give it to somebody with an empty stomach, and look what happens. They build up a very, very high blood alcohol concentration very, very quickly. In less than an hour, they reach maximum. Give it to somebody, that's just 1 unit, right? Give that to somebody on a full stomach, and look what happens. They still absorb the alcohol, but they absorb it slowly. And all the time that they're absorbing here, in all of this time here, the body is busy processing what it has already absorbed. So you never reach a very high blood alcohol level overall. Here, all of that alcohol goes into the bloodstream very, very quickly. So you reach a very high blood alcohol level very, very quickly. Full stomach, it takes longer, and the maximum that you reach is much lower. Now that's, again, that's fine. This is really good. These are good things to remember. But also remember that people drink to effect, and that in fact, psychologically, what they may want is that high level, is the impact of this high level. If they're not drinking because they want that effect, then this may be all that they're going to drink. But somebody drinking on a full stomach may attempt to get this by very quickly adding not just the 5 ounces, adding another 5 ounces, adding another 5 ounces. So it can be a very dangerous strategy. So when alcohol is absorbed, it actually really quickly percolates through all of our body tissues and all of our body fluids. When somebody, an unfortunate circumstance, for example, a car accident where we believe that alcohol might be involved or something like that, many body fluids will be sampled to see what the alcohol content is. And this actually tells a story about very often about how long that person was drinking and how much they were drinking. You start off by examining the stomach itself. What is present in somebody at autopsy? What is present in the stomach? Is there alcoholic fluid present in the stomach, which has not yet been absorbed by the stomach? Remember, alcohol is absorbed very, very quickly. If there's alcohol still present in the stomach fluids, it suggests that the person was drinking very, very recently before they died. The alcohol levels will be determined for the blood itself, but it will also be determined for the brain, maybe determined for the cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid around the spine and around the brain. And then this one here, which is really interesting, is called the vitreous humor. And it's the interior of the eye is occupied by a substance which is almost like a gel. It's like jello consistency, and that's called the vitreous humor. Vitreous humor is very useful because it is one of the last fluids to accumulate alcohol and one of the last to lose its alcohol. So it forms a very good record. Even if other fluids, maybe in the blood and the brain, may appear to be lower, if you look at the vitreous humor, it may give you a record of very high previous alcohol levels, which have been processed elsewhere in the body. So all of these may be taken, especially at autopsy. So that blood alcohol at 0.1, 0.8, 0.08 is the legal limit. This is actually a blood percentage. So it's percent weight per volume. So in other words, 0.1, which is really high, is 0.1 grams of alcohol, pure alcohol, per 100 milliliters of blood. And that's, so it's grams per liter in actual fact. So 0.1 grams per 100 milliliters, 0.1%, that is the blood alcohol level. Let's just go back, try and work out at somebody with a blood alcohol level of 0.1%, and let's see where they are. They're right here. They are far too impaired to be out driving. They're getting dangerously emotionally unstable, and they're just about to head here. They're over the legal limit, way over the legal limit. And if they have another drink or two, they're going to head into this real danger zone here of emotional lability, dangerous mood swings, and often in many people, a tendency to suddenly become angry for no apparent, or unreasonably angry for no apparent reason. So it becomes very important for toxicologists to determine the blood alcohol level as accurately as possible. Most of the processing of alcohol takes place in the liver. There are enzymes called alcohol dehydrogenases. There are several of them that break down the alcohol. But we also breathe out alcohol. We actually, it passes out of the bloodstream into the gases of the lungs and is breathed out as alcohol. We also release it in sweat and urine. And this issue of the alcohol dehydrogenase, if we hit the liver hard enough, high enough dosage of alcohol, the liver is unable to process the alcohol properly and produces toxic byproducts. The most important of these are called the aldehydes. And the aldehydes are what produce most of the effects of the hangover. They produce muscle ache, joint ache, headache, lethargy, nausea. All of these things are results of abuse of alcohol, which has filled the body with these aldehydes. It also produces a distinctive smell, which is that terrible old alcohol smell that you can sometimes smell on people who have been drinking the day before. So we're going to burn off from here. We're going to burn off about 0.015% an hour. So we process 1 unit in an hour. If your blood alcohol was as high as 0.1, it would take you about 6.5 hours to come down to 0. That's a long time. And unfortunately, human beings have a very poor ability to gauge their own levels of intoxication. Somebody who has been severely intoxicated with a blood alcohol of 0.1, 2 hours later, they feel completely different to the way they did when their blood alcohol was 0.1, but their blood alcohol level may still be over the legal limit, but they feel like they're much more sober and go out and start to behave as if and try to do things that they should only do when they are fully sober, like drive a car. So it's extremely dangerous aspect of drinking. Human beings have a very poor ability to judge their own level of sobriety. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for today. We'll carry on with this discussion next time, where we're going to find out what exactly it is that the policeman is doing when he stops you at the side of the road and says, will you please breathe into this? So leave there, and then I'll see you on Friday. Okay, thanks.